welcome to another edition of the Ask Bill Keegan Show. I'm Bill Keegan, Town Manager here in Foxborough. I have a really information-filled session for you this time around. We want to talk a little bit about the new Town Hall project that has been debated for a number of years, but has reached another point, an important point in the history of this project. And here with me today are two special guests, Ken Elovitz, who is a member of the Town Hall Working Group, along with Bill Euchner, who is also a member of the Town Hall Working Group. Bill Euchner is also, is also a member of the Permanent Building Committee. He's actually chairman of the Permanent Building Committee. And Ken Elovitz is a member of the Ad Hoc Committee here in town. I'd like to start the show today to talk a little bit about the history of this project. Both of you gentlemen have been in Foxborough for a while and have known that there's been a long-standing history about this project. And I think it would be nice to hear from both of you as to how this whole debate has sort of begun. And Bill, I'll let you start.
Actually, it goes back probably some 15 years ago, and that was really with the needs within the building changing from the original design. And there were a number of studies done, and it's kind of morphed forward into the last 4 years, in which we've been into a serious debate on what to do with the town hall. During the same time, because every time it seemed like we were getting close to doing something, unfortunately, not as much maintenance was done on the existing building as probably should have been if it was going to be an ongoing concern. So it's added to the overall discussion and problems with where the building stands today and where we're going with it. But I think over the last 4 years, we've kind of really reviewed the issues within the building now. We've brought to the forefront, I think, in this last rendition, exactly what we believe as taxpayers we need for what I'll call our central office for the town. And hopefully what we bring forward at this point, based on what the working group has done with your leadership under it, and a very varied group, which I think you should probably expound on what's on the group as far as number of people and where they come from. But everybody had a little bit different tilt on what this building was about, and I think we've come to a pretty good consensus on what we need to do.
Well, the working group was formed literally within weeks of my starting here back in May of 2014, just about 6 months ago. And the purpose of that was to try and gather as many different opinions around the table to see how we could try and change that. And I know, Ken, you bring sort of a different perspective of this project, because when you first came into this discussion, you had a pretty clear perspective at one point. So why don't you talk about your perspective on what's happened?
Well, I only became aware of the project in the last 4 or 5 years when it was discussed in the newspapers, and there was talk about building a new town hall, and we had the report analysis done by KBA, and a group of citizens got together and had a bunch of different people had a bunch of different questions about what direction the project should go in. So we started to kick around different ideas, and that eventually evolved into our participation in the working group that you put together. And I think the project or the task of the working group has developed now into less what should we do and more into how are we going to do what has been decided we should do.
Right. And I think just to get everyone up to speed on what's been happening is that the committee has now met, the group has worked has met 13 different times over the course of that past 4 or 5 month period. And we've discussed virtually every aspect of the project. I mean, that included from the beginning, we talked about which direction should we go? Should it be renovation? Should it be new? And if new, where should the building should be located? So we looked at different sites. We looked at and we narrowed that field right down to a pretty small couple of choices. And then we also really focused in on what the actual square footage needs of the building should be, and how that should and really what's the best, and not a wish list, but really what's the real needs of the organization, and what that would be the best working number. And it's interesting because a lot of folks had different perspectives when we started, but now virtually all of us have reached some conclusions about this project. And And perhaps maybe either one of you, Bill, you can maybe give me your thoughts about how that's evolved.
Yeah, and actually, I think there was a third component that we also looked at that's important to mention, which was the leasing concept.
Yes.
So there was three approaches we took.
Right.
As you said, we looked at sites. I think it was pretty easy to realize in the end that we needed to narrow it down to a site that the town owned.
Right.
Because paying for somebody else's site and then end up owning our own sites that we currently have didn't make a lot of sense. Right. And that only gave us 2 locations. And so based on the town's overall design and the master plan and things, the town hall staying where it is today made the most sense to the selectmen, and that's what the selectmen have basically put back to the working group to now work through. The leasing option, again, I think we did a pretty good job on that, and as far as locating even all the buildings that would possibly fit the build. Ironically, there's not that many in town, and the most likely suspects are on the town's edges, either up on Route 1 or over on the Mansfield line, and doesn't seem to be a large appetite in town for us to move Town Hall away from the center. So those have their own problems on that. And further, we also took the numbers and said, okay, based on the working group's new square footage requirements, if you just leased that amount of space in the few bids that we did get, it still was more cost effective under the build at your own process. So I think in developing the space requirements, again, a subgroup of the working committee went through every single department. And what we did was we accounted for every person within the department that was going to work. We accounted for their work area and the amount of filing space and operational space they needed within their each operational area. We added those all up and basically came up to a number. And in the end, the working group played with that number. There was some debate on size of cubicles, size of offices, and I thought it was a healthy debate relative to what is practical for what we're trying to accomplish. In some cases, one office might be larger than the other because you knew there would be group meetings in that office that had to happen on a daily basis, whether it was with staff or outside people. So you had to account for that little extra work area, where another one might be strictly a desk in an area for confidentiality reasons. So we tried to lay that all out, and again, kind of being more the layman in the group, not trying to do it from a professional basis, but from what we saw. In the end, pulled together the number. The number came out pretty close to 11,000 square feet. And then as a group, we discussed, well, how much space do you need for the common areas, the hallways, the stairways, the elevators, your mechanical spaces and stuff like that. And, we came up with a factor. And the factor, honestly, you can see anywhere from 1.3, 1.4, times the original number. And the group felt we'd use a conservative number at the 1.4 to get our number built that way. And that's, where the 15,500 comes from.
Now we all know that whatever number that we have is most likely will not be the final number, because we're going to, once we have the funding in place that we're asking for at the November 17th town meeting, if that happens, if the town supports that request, we'll then be able to hire a professional architecture firm that will actually come in and make that determination more clear. Ken, what was it that you found was actually helpful for you in this debate in the process that we established several months ago about working on these numbers, working on the square footage numbers? You brought some really helpful comments to this discussion. So why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I think it's important to understand how we develop the numbers and the purpose of the numbers. Right. We develop the numbers, as Bill said, to define the problem that we're trying to solve. The problem is what functions need to be performed inside Town Hall and approximately how much space is required for that program. And then the adjustment factors and the 1.3 or 1.4, the scale-up factors to take into account common areas and corridors, those were guideline numbers that we used to get our arms around the likely size of the overall building, and we then used that to develop a budget for the project. In terms of implementing the project, though, instead of taking a bottom-up, building this thing piece by piece, we're assigning the architect a project or a task from a top-down approach. Right. We've said we have a certain budget for a project, and we want the architect to take these program needs that we've established, which was the roughly 11,000 square feet, and design a building that will fit on the site and that will incorporate the necessary common areas and will fit within our budget. So we have not really focused on the square footage. We don't know what the square footage is going to be.
Right.
We're hiring an architect to determine that level of detail for
Finalize
us.
that detail, right.
Finalize that detail, and we're focusing on the job that this building has to do.
Right, which is really the focus really of what our discussions have been. And let's get into the discussion a little bit about, because I know there's been a lot of debate around town, renovation versus new, and you know, why take down a working building that people have seen for the past 50 years, and why is it so important to go build new versus renovate? And there's been debates on both sides of this issue, and no one person in particular in our working group has felt very strongly about this issue, but the remaining members have gone in a different direction. So let's talk a little bit about that. Ken, you want to just say a few words?
Well, first of all, the selectmen voted to build new.
Right.
So that's one decision that's already been.
It did help us in moving that direction.
Right, it's taken away from us.
That's right.
I would say that there's probably nothing in our RFP that would preclude the architect from exploring a gut rehab if they thought that was a cost-effective way to approach the site, approach the site and approach the project. But if we did do a gut rehab of the existing town hall, we have an additional cost of moving employees out, the cost of actually making the move, the cost of renting and fitting out the temporary space, and then the cost of moving back. So that's a cost that would be deducted from the potential value of the building shell.
Yeah.
If we do a gut rehab, we are stuck with the footprint and the layout, what we have. So the architect does not have as much design flexibility. And with a newer building, you have the opportunity to use newer materials or more modern concepts. And it's just, the building potentially has some value. You don't know what that value is. You don't know what problems might be encountered.
Right.
And
well, it's the age-old question that when you do a renovation, you don't know what you're going to get into once you start the project. And I think that's really the one major concern that we all have, and I think we all share this, is that we don't know what the real number is going to be when you do that. Whereas you build new, it's a much more predictable number.
Yes.
And I think, in going back to the point that you made earlier about the selectmen, saying to us they want to build new, we didn't just accept that as a premise, though. Even though that was the direction, we didn't accept that premise alone. We went back and we looked, because we wanted to make sure that was the right direction, and that if there was a question about it, we could go back to them and say, look, you better think about this a little bit more. But their direction was, let's look at this from a new building perspective, for obvious reasons. There were a lot of reasons that are associated with that reason, that direction. But doing that made us feel, I think, a little bit more comfortable that ultimately this decision is the right one because of the breakdowns that we did. We went through the various aspects of the building and said, geez, if with all the different requirements that are in the building code today, the ADA issues, the elevator requirements, the different structural requirements of a building now, the seismic requirements. The real question in my mind was, what are we really going to save in the end?
Well,
and Bill, do you want to?
Yeah, and I think actually you hit on, there's 2 points there. I think one of the issues that we've been saying for a number of years now is that, typically, and I want to step back one thing. I think the building committee, all the way back to the building committee starting this process, everybody felt the same way. We all felt that we should be able to renovate this building to be what we wanted to originally. And then it's once you get into the real guts of it that you start to understand, the issues that this building, have, which is very different than other buildings we've done in town. And I think it's obvious. We have renovated buildings in town when it was appropriate.
Right.
But just like the joint public safety was not appropriate to try to renovate the 2 facilities, it made more sense to build a new one. Right. The town hall is in the same situation. It's a nice looking colonial building from the exterior, but there are a number of issues that no one will know until you do that full gut rehab that Ken was talking about as to whether how sound the exterior walls are, which is basically what you're trying to save. Right. We know of issues in certain areas because of water damage over the years. Once you start to take that apart, how big of a contingency are you going to have to cover that?
Exactly.
If you find out that you're doing really destructive approaches to that exterior, now really what have you saved?
Right.
And that can be more expensive. As you said, bringing everything up to the codes. True, you can bring everything up to the codes in any building. It depends on how much you're willing to spend and how much time you're willing to take. Right. But the end result is, no matter what, there will be 2 levels of office space available in the end. The upper level, which has a much more sound, height and ceilings and stuff like that, and then the lower level, which is a much more confined space area. So there will be an A and a B class level of office space on a renovation, versus on a new construction, as Ken said, you have the total flexibility to build everything in a common format in a way that lays out and meets
right.
the
and
needs.
to work around the challenges that you're faced with the new construction mode. Let's take a look at some of the pictures of Town Hall, if you will. To kind of indicate to some of the challenges that we identified. Well, first of all, let's take a look at the outside of the building. You can see that the outside, it's a very attractive building from the outside, and I think everyone in the committee is committed to trying recapturing that type of colonial look in the new building. So,
But let's even start with that. So your lower level of this, as you can tell, your windows are within a foot of the ground. So it was
right.
designed with a concept low into the ground, and obviously bringing you into the water table. Right. Can you go and do all new drainage around this building and totally rebuild it? Absolutely, you can. But when you build any building nowadays, you would not try to build it so that it's at the lowest point within the building, within the premises, and drainage issues.
Well, for security purposes as well. I mean, that's another consideration in today's environment.
Right.
So we have to think about that as well. Here's the back of the building. You can see that, and by the way, the front of the building isn't even accessible now because of the space limitations that we have there. So we really enter the building from the back of the building, and you can see that. Notice the window air conditioners. There's no central air in the building.
Right.
The building, the roof. We're going to have to end up doing some repairs, even on an interim basis, because of the roof conditions are so bad at this point. We need to actually do that just to keep the building going and operating over the course of the next few years. You can see the former garage area. This is the lower level was the former police department, which moved out obviously 6, 7, 8 years ago now.
Yes.
So we've been going with this building with basically limited use of the bottom floor for the past year or two. But we still have that space here. Now this is actually the former selectmen's hearing room space that we've had to actually cannibalize in order to make to keep all the offices in the town hall. Mm-hmm. So right here is a space for the planning and conservation area, and the new assistant town manager's office is actually located in this area right now temporarily. This is the only conference space we have in the entire building, other than 5 chairs around my office, my desk in my office. So it's actually very limited. This is the men's bathroom, which we try to make ADA accommodations to by taking the door off. So it's actually kind of comical in some ways. But this, you can see the women's bathrooms are actually limited because they're really not that accessible because of the way the doorways are set up. And this is some of the sinks. And you can see 1960s era, olive green coloration to the countertops. So and check out the narrowness of the corridors here. I mean, in this day and age, these corridors would be much wider because just to meet the accessibility issues that we look for. And I think the next slide will show, if we can. Well, this is the front doorway that we had again cannibalized in order to provide space enough for copying areas and mailroom and storage of various information and files. Here is the front hallway area, which is really the back door into the building. But you can see, doesn't look all that badly, but it's not very welcoming either in many ways. It's obviously very 1960s era, but the countertops are not ADA accessible. I mean, so in and of itself is a challenge. We'd have to actually lower all those countertops, or at least count a space in the countertops to make them accessible. Again, the narrow doorways, spaces that were actually created after the building has evolved because we just needed the space in order to make the building work. This is the building department, which if you look behind the cabinets, that's actually where the animal control office is located behind in that area because there is no office space. It's just the cabinets to sort of help use as demarcation line. This is some of the storage area downstairs. We are in the process right now of looking at working with a company to actually try and minimize a lot of these files so that we can actually go more towards a paperless organization. But we're going to try and reduce some of this paper that we have downstairs in the building. Notice that the chairs are all up on the table. The reason why is because that the bottom level does have a tendency to flood still. I actually noticed it this past summer when I was in the building, where the water just gets to a certain level and then starts to come in the building. Again, this is the downstairs corridor way in the which showing the narrow corridors that used to be the police department, and you can see that again the narrow corridor way in the area above, which is pretty minimal. But I think that a point's been made. Well, we can actually build around this. Well, you can see that these are cinder block walls. I mean, those are not easily moved. Whereas if there were panel walls, we could certainly move them back. So these are the kind of challenges that we faced and we noticed in looking at the building when we tried to build it, try to renovate, is that these are the kind of things we wanted to look at. Again, what we have here is the dehumidifier, because of the area still has a tendency to flood once in a while. We try to keep the water out of the basement.
Bill, I think there's two points to bring up about on the pictures that you showed.
Mm-hmm.
Number one is that the public area where the counters,
Right.
that's the part of town hall that most people see.
Right.
That admittedly doesn't look so bad, and apart from the accessibility issues, it's pretty functional.
Right.
But that's only a small portion of the town hall. So these
Exactly.
pictures that you showed of the behind the scenes things highlight problems and concerns that are not apparent, or that might not be apparent to people,
most people walking the
walking
building.
in to pay
Right.
their bills or
Right.
to do business with the town clerk or something like that.
Yeah, so it's a very good point that the working public, or the public that come into the building, see very little of the actual town hall space, because they're there for to either pay a bill, to get a permit, to get a license, to pay their taxes. But a lot of the meeting space now is held outside the building because we can't hold it in the building. So even that traffic has been reduced in that regard. We want to bring that traffic back because we want to create this as, and I think, Bill, you described it best as being the central office space of the town. It's sort of like the hub of the wheel, if you will, as to how we function as an organization.
The other thing I want to point out is that if we build a new building on that site, we have the opportunity to make the front of the building be the front entrance of the building.
Exactly. Yeah.
We have a nice looking building at the front that fronts on South Street, and we don't use
no access.
no access. That's not
right.
not where everybody enters the building. So we would have the opportunity to design the building in a way that when you drive up, you enter at the
proper front entrance.
at the proper front entrance, like a guest.
Yeah, that's right.
And yeah, that's another advantage of building a new building. That's one of the design flexibility features that I mentioned.
Yeah, that's right.
And it would be an
That's
advantage. I mean, you have a nice looking building, no one gets to see the nice looking part of it.
exactly. So
I think one of the other things that we briefly, when I made the comment about the central office thing, and a lot of times we'll hear the comments that, well, we're building a building for 34, 35 people. And the reality there that kind of strikes me as coming from the private sector before I came into the town side is that as the central office, every department in town is dependent on these 35 people. And we all interact with those 35 people. So whether it's police, fire, schools, we only do a portion of the work that's involved on our sides and departments, where the town hall is doing a big portion for us. Our benefits are all managed through that, so you're managing benefits for 600 people. Those 600 people do come into town hall when they have issues with benefits, and try to get those straightened out. And they also, when you look at, as representing the school side now, I don't collect money. I don't, send bills. I don't deal with all that issue. I just have my budget to work off of. If it wasn't for town side, I would not have the resources to do that. And again, so all of us as departments do our jobs, but we're highly dependent on what's happening within that building, and we all highly interact with what's in that building.
Let's talk a little bit about the finances of this, because I know there's been a lot of numbers kicked around, and I think some of them have been somewhat misleading in many ways. So, I think we want to try and just let the folks know that we spent a lot of time on this piece, and our goal is to try and get this project to work within the existing budget, so as to not go to a debt exclusion if we can at all help that. So. Let's talk about that a little bit. There's been different numbers kicked around, and I think let's talk a little bit about what we're looking for at this current town meeting. The current town meeting is we're looking at the soft cost issue, and we're trying to, and how we're trying to capture that is to identify what that cost will be by going out to bid now, and And you want to talk a little bit about that process, and I'll come back to you, Ken, on some other processes.
So what we've done is we have obviously gone out for proposals on both the architect and the project manager. The issue is that a number was floated almost a year ago on what we were estimating it would cost us, and that was in the 550,000 range. But the reality is we don't know what that number is today. We don't know any of the numbers. We don't know the square footages. We have our best estimates, our best anticipated costs. So what we were going to be able to do is come to town meeting, and whatever the number is, we'll be able to defend the number based on knowing who the architectural firm that's been accepted to do the work is, who the project manager is, and what their fee schedule is to do the entire project, even though phase one will only be the design through the bidding process. Right. So we'll have that information. It will be locked down, and whatever it is, obviously we're going to negotiate as best we can to get it down to a number that's reasonable based on the scope of the project. But whatever it is, that's the real number. Right. No other number that we have out there.
Right. So it's not a guesstimate like we've been seeing repeatedly. Ken, your thoughts on the cost of the project and how we're getting there?
Well, I think it's important to go back to the top-down approach that I mentioned, that we use some numbers that we developed from examining costs that other towns had paid for their actual projects. Recent projects. Right. And we use those numbers to develop an overall project budget for this project. And we've identified that budget in our request for proposals from the architects. So if the architects think that this project cannot be done within that budget, we're not going to get any proposals.
Right.
If we get proposals, and we've had a lot of interest, we've had at least 10 or 12 architectural firms that have taken out the request for proposals, and we're hoping that they're going to respond to us.
And as of today, there are at least 7 coming in, so that's a good sign.
Yeah. So on their proposals, they're going to be telling us how they plan to, in general terms, how they plan to implement this project within that budget. Right. So we're getting some feedback and sort of reality check from people in the business as to whether our budget is realistic. So we're establishing a budget for the project, but as Bill says, we're also approaching this that before we ask for money from the town, we're going to have the exact amount of money that we're looking for.
Right. And I think that's really the key. I mean, I'm always cautious about putting numbers out for projects because once you start doing that, people become sort of married to those numbers. And I think this approach is actually a very good one. It's different from how we've handled other projects, where we typically ask for a number and then try to build into that number. This case, we're gonna build the project or identify the project costs and then ask for the funding to finance it. And
well, it's just like instead of saying we want a building of X square feet size, we're saying we want a building that will do this job. Right. So we're challenging the architects to a greater degree than they are challenged in the traditional process. And I think that part of that challenge or that benefit to the town came from the coordinated knowledge of all the people on the working group that you put together. Right. People came together, we had these ideas, we kicked them around, and we said, hey, let's do this a little bit of a different way and to get what we hope will be the best bang for the buck.
Right. It's been a good process. I mean, I've been very grateful for the work that both you gentlemen have put on the committee, and it's interesting because you both came from different perspectives starting off, and it's nice to be able to see that. It's been great for me to learn more about the project and how the challenges have been and how we've been faced with those challenges. This is not the first project I've worked on. I've worked on multiple projects over the course of my career. I know, Bill, you've been involved in a lot of projects, including the police public safety and the library projects more recently. Again, great projects came out very, very well and on the budget in all cases. So I think that's the key piece to what we've achieved here. And going forward from here, we want to try and answer as many questions as possible. We've put frequently asked questions on our website. There's been one individual who's been challenging every one of those issues, but that information that we put out there is information that we've obtained from our working group, and so I know that there's different perspectives, but and it's interesting. I've actually complimented the different perspectives because what that's done for me and for other members of the committee has challenged us personally to think outside that box a little bit more. And I think that's what we've achieved here so far, and I think I'm really pleased with that.
And we've explored those challenges, and we didn't just dismiss them.
Right, exactly. And I think that's really important. It's like we didn't just say, okay, we want it in this direction. There's been some folks who have said that, hey, look, you know, they had their minds made up before they started. I can tell you honestly, we didn't. I mean, because there were two different perspectives around the table when we started. We actually grew into that direction based on the debate that's been occurring around the table.
And I think it's also important to emphasize that, or to repeat, that we're taking a little bit different approach to the project from the traditional approach from both the design side and the financing side, or not the financing side, but the money side, the budget side. Instead of taking the solution, saying the solution, we've defined the problem and we're hiring an architect to create that solution for us.
Right.
And we've also established a budget for the project and say, architect, we want you to design a project that will fit within this budget. Instead of the more traditional approach is to take a building size and then build a building of that size and hope that the prices come in with, at a workable level.
Right.
We're giving a much harder task to the architects, which is fine. We're going to pay them for
We're
it.
Challenging. We're
challenging them, and that's what we want.
And of course, at the end, we still don't know. I mean, as much as we're trying to go in a direction that's predictable to a degree, we don't know what the economy will do. We don't know what interest rates will do. We don't know what any of those things will happen over the course of the next several years, because this will be a multi-year project. We know that we're looking at the design phase. The schedule that we're looking at, conceptually, is go to town meeting in November. If we're successful there, not presuming anything, if assuming that we are successful, that we get the money, go to the architect's design phase, and we'll be ready to hire somebody almost the next day, because we have gone through that process already. The OPM will be on board, the overall project manager. So a lot of those important pieces have already been done. We're ready to go in that regard. And then our goal would be to go maybe perhaps September, October of next year, go to a special town meeting and ask for the funding for the construction of the project itself.
And at that point, everything actually will be pretty firm, because not only will we have the contract pricing, but Randy would have started to already work on the bonding side of it, so you'll lock the interest rates very quickly at that point in time, assuming it's a favorable time to do it. So I think when we get to that September town meeting, for the taxpayer, it's going to be pretty much a certainty, with a single item of obviously carrying some little bit amount of a contingency, because the one unknown that we will have at that point in time is what is in the ground. That where we want to put the building, and assuming that there's no issue there, which some of the tests show that there really isn't, then that's a non.
And we have done some preliminary testing on that. We did do some exploratory work, even on a preliminary basis, to make sure that we're going to run into those kind of issues. But again, everything is still subject to those final evaluations. But I think the process has been good. I hope that the town will have the confidence in us that the work that we've done is enough to carry the day at the meeting on the 17th. But ultimately, the information that we are providing is strictly information for folks to decide. Ultimately, it's their decision to go either way. But I think, hopefully, we've done a lot of good work to give people a lot of information to vote on this thing with an informative position. So I want to thank both of you for being here today. This has been very helpful, hopefully informative to the public. I will be back hopefully in a couple weeks with some more information about the financing piece. I'd like to bring our finance director, Randy Scollins, in to do further discussion about the actual financing piece. Also, just a couple other quick notes. I may very well bring the new assistant town manager on at that point, Mary Beth Bernard, who just joined me this past week. Also to talk about some of the other things that have been going on around town other than this project. We've been busy on a lot of different fronts as of late, so I'll get into some of those details at the next show. So for now, I just want to say thanks for joining me on this edition of the Ask Bill Keegan Show. We'll look for you to in a couple weeks to fill you in some more information, but for now, thanks for joining us.